Supreme Court of Appeal in Bloemfontein is today expected to hear the appeal of former President Jacob Zuma on the issue of his medical parole. Zuma is appealing an earlier High Court judgment which ruled that his release on medical parole was unlawful and irrational. Now, he's been serving a 15-month prison sentence for contempt of court after he failed to abide by the Constitutional Court order requiring him to appear before the Commission of Inquiry into allegations of state capture. A former Correctional Services Commissioner, Fraser, then released Zuma in less than 2 months against the recommendation of the Medical Parole Advisory Board. SABC reporter I Samkele Maseko is also out in Bloemfontein covering the story for us. Let's cross to him now to find out what's happening outside the court. Wasn't much happening earlier, Samkele, but how's it looking now? Good morning.
Well, Sakina, at this point in time, we are still waiting and anticipating the supporters of former President Jacob Zuma to come and support him here outside the Supreme Court of Appeals. This comes after the Helen Suzman Foundation and the Democratic Alliance challenged the former Director General of Correctional Services, Mr. Fraser, for giving former President Jacob Zuma medical parole after his incarceration of 12 months, which was slapped before him by the Constitutional Court for him not appearing before the State Capture Commission of Inquiry led by then Deputy Chief Justice Raymond Zondo. But the usual faces have arrived here in court. Mr. Carl Niehaus, who is an ardent supporter of former President Jacob Zuma, is here currently outside court, who are anticipating the arrival of the suspended Secretary General of the ANC, Ace Magashule, and Sam Mashinini, the former provincial chairperson of the Northwest Province. We also anticipate that the former President Jacob Zuma will also arrive in person here at the Supreme Court of Appeals. We have seen some of his support staff members also here who work within his office. But I'm going to bring in Mr. Carl Niehaus here. Mr. Niehaus, former President Jacob Zuma, he's here at the Supreme Court of Appeals over the issue of his medical parole, which it was said that he was unlawfully granted that medical parole by a High Court. He's challenging it here now at the Supreme Court of Appeals.
Well, once again, our justice system now has to show its mettle, and our justice system has to do justice to President Zuma. It was correct to grant President Zuma the parole that he was given. There was nothing wrong with that. The authority that rested with Mr. Arthur Fraser at that time as Commissioner of Correctional Services was clear, and President Zuma should be allowed to continue with his parole, although I want to emphasize, and I've said this many times before, the sentence that President Zuma was given by the Constitutional Court was entirely unjustifiable. It was not a proper legal process, and he should never have been given that sentence. But under the circumstances, he is correct to have received this parole. The parole was granted to him in a proper manner, and I hope that the court will do justice to President Zuma today.
Mr. Niehaus, are you anticipating the arrival of former President Jacob Zuma here in court? We have seen some of his support staff members around his office whom are also here present in court.
Yes, President Zuma will appear in person. He will be here at the Supreme Court of Appeal.
When you look at the Helen Suzman Foundation and the Democratic Alliance, we are also anticipating the arrival of the DA leader, Mr. John Steenhuisen, and the grounds that they've presented that Arthur Fraser placing former President Jacob Zuma. When you go to the State Capture Commission of Inquiry report by Deputy Chief Justice Raymond Zondo, it says that Arthur Fraser was given a lifeline by former President Jacob Zuma when there was an inquiry of misconduct against Arthur Fraser, and the docket was then put aside in the assistance of Siyabonga Cwele, the then Minister of Intelligence in the country. And later, years on, it is the same Arthur Fraser who gave former President Jacob Zuma a lifeline when it came to him granting the former president parole, which means they kept one another from going to prison.
You'll forgive me for laughing. Arthur Fraser requested of Mr. Justice Zondo to give him the opportunity to state his case. He was never given that opportunity. The Commission of Inquiry into State Capture made certain findings which Mr. Fraser is clearly opposing. I do not want to get into the silly politics of the Democratic Alliance and the Helen Suzman Foundation. There's no surprises where they come from. There's no surprises about the positions that they have taken. But the fact of the matter is, Mr. Fraser had acted within his rights as Commissioner of Correctional Services when he granted the parole to President Zuma. There was no washing of hands. There was no one taking care of the other. It was simple, legal execution of what the powers was in the hands of Mr. Fraser. This is a nonsense case. It should be thrown out of court. President Zuma is entitled to the parole that he received, and Arthur Fraser was correct in granting that parole to him.
Thank you very much, Mr. Carl Niehaus. That is Mr. Carl Niehaus, who is one of the supporters of former President Jacob Zuma. I do remember that at the Pietermaritzburg Divisional High Court in the criminal trial of former President Jacob Zuma, you did see there for the first time Mr. Arthur Fraser, where he was brought there to that specific court to explain the medical parole of the former president, which also saw the postponement of that criminal trial of former President Jacob Zuma, which is due to go to court in that Divisional High Court in Pietermaritzburg very soon again. Then here today he is at the Supreme Court of Appeals appealing that High Court judgment that said that the medical parole he was granted by Arthur Fraser was illegal and was undue. You go back to the relationship in the State Capital Commission of report outlined by Deputy Chief Justice Raymond Zondo, which implicates Arthur Fraser in corruption, wrongdoing in the State Intelligence Agency, and also in the report that was meant to be done and investigations by the Hawks, which was later on quashed, which also implicates the former Minister of State Security and Intelligence, Siyabonga Cwele, and how the former president essentially quashed that investigation, saying that it places the intelligence of the country and the country at risk if they were to investigate Mr. Arthur Fraser. Years later, Mr. Arthur Fraser was the one to grant medical parole to former President Jacob Zuma, which is a case of hands washing hands. Sakina.
Well, thank you so much, there, Samkele Maseko, and of course keeping an eye on developments for us as those court proceedings are set to get underway not too long from now. SABC reporters will have those cameras trained inside and outside that court, so we'll bring you a comprehensive report on what's been happening there. Let's